Hello and welcome to yesterday's Airlines. In this video I'm going to be talking about the NG Models September release announcements. I admit I'm a little bit late and I apologise for that, but I've obviously just been over at the Amsterdam Aviation Fair over the weekend, so I haven't got or had the opportunity to create this video sooner than that. So sorry about that. It was a great fair though, so I can highly recommend that people pop over next year if you can to Amsterdam, because it was really good. Great to meet up with fellow collectors and also to get the opportunity to buy some really nice models at good prices. But anyway, enough of that. On to NG Models releases for this month, of which there are 23 announcements. Now, NG have also announced, or kind of half announced, 5 or 6 other models. I think there are 3 TriStars, a couple of Airbuses, an A350 as well, I think. And I'm not going to talk about those. They're kind of... I'm not really sure what's going on, in the sense like they're not releases for September, they're future releases as they're calling them. It's a little bit like the sort of nonsense that jcwings does. I can't say I'm a big fan of it. I would much prefer that NG sticks to announcing models it's going to release the next month, or at least that it hopes it's going to get out the next month. NG has been slipping on its release schedule in recent times, which is not ideal. I think that it's important for customers to be able to get reliable service from the manufacturers, so I don't like companies pre-ordering or trying to get pre-orders by announcing models months in advance. It seems a little bit rubbish. So hopefully NG won't continue to do that, but I'm not going to talk about those models this month. I'll talk about them the next month. Obviously the TriStars will be lovely, but that's for next month or whenever it is that they are included in a release announcement. For September there are 23 models, which is still a really large set, so that is what we will be looking at in this video. I have to admit that when I first looked at the list, I thought, this looks kind of familiar, and certainly there are quite a few models here which have been released by other brands or are going to be released by other brands. But actually also I was surprised when I looked through in detail how many of these models are unique, even if they do seem quite familiar. So that's what we'll be discussing in this video. Let's get on to that. But before we do, obviously, thanks very much for watching. Please like and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Check me out at Instagram and Facebook at YesterdayAirlines, and check out yesterdaysairlines.com, because obviously that is the place where I post a lot of my material. Also, I've got the 400 scale in detail Facebook group running, which is a really cool place to be able to discuss model airplanes without getting abused by certain people, and a good place to, get a good idea about what's going on in the scale from other collectors too. So check that out as well. But now let's get on to the bulk of the video. So we're going to start off as usual with the Airbuses, of which there's quite a large number. A little bit less than half of the 23 releases come from the European manufacturer. And the first ones we're going to be discussing are a pair of Airbus A321s, both in the colours of jet blue. They are both A321 CEOs, not NEOs, which is good to see. And they're not the first JetBlue A321s NG have made, because NG have already made 2 previously. They've made 1 CEO and 1 NEO. And what is actually interesting is that these new releases were the same tail colours as the previous ones. So NG clearly saving themselves a bit of money, being able to reuse the same tail colours, but the aircraft are different. So this time around, what we've got is we've got N965JT, and this is wearing the prism tail, and it is the first US built A321 actually. So this tail has been made, as I say, before by NG, and in fact also by it was also an A321 CEO at the time. It was N948 JB that was made previously. So in many ways this is effectively a re-release of that model just with a different rego, which isn't the most exciting thing in the universe if you've already got the previous one, especially. And I imagine a lot of JetBlue collectors would have got that model, which was made 2 years ago in 2020. The other model, the other aircraft is N905JB, and this one's wearing the balloon's tail. That tail has also been made by NG, but that was, the previous release was an A321neo. So this is actually a new model. It is not the same as was done previously, though it's obviously very similar. It's just got the different engines, different reg. So, you know, I haven't got anything against this, it's especially for an airline like JetBlue, which is heavily collected. And I think that, you know, in some ways it's good to be able to get a range for the same airline. I know that I collect quite a few airlines, and it is nice to get the different options. I've got, you know, A321 Neos and CEOs, and the different engine options in the CEOs for major Chinese airlines like China Southern and China Eastern is something that I do want. So I can understand that other JetBlue collectors would also want two, say, for example, A321s with a balloon tail, one being a CEO, one being a Neo. So that makes sense to me. Re-releasing the prism tails on effectively the same airframe makes a little bit less sense to me. So that one I'm going to put into workhorse territory because it's just a re-release. But the other version I think I'm going to put up there into the high flyer, because that one is a little bit unique. It's not been done before, and looking back through previous releases, I don't think it's been done before by anyone else either. I see that Gemini have also made the back tail with the balloons for a Neo, and indeed so have Aero Classics, but neither of them have made the CEO. So that one's going to stay in high flyer. Next up, we've got 4 Condor A330-200s. I've talked about the Condor livery, the new Condor livery before, and jcwings have announced one of these with the kind of sandy colours tail already. So these aircraft all wear effectively a hybrid scheme. They've got the new stripy scheme only on the tail, and the fuselage is just plain white. I think these aircraft are just going to be temporary releases waiting for their A330neos to arrive. So 3 of these releases this month from NG are wearing the new scheme. In that version, we've got the sandy colours, we've got the blue version of it, we've got the green version of it, and the 4th one is actually wearing the scheme beforehand, which is actually nicer, which has big Condor titles and the classic Condor logo in large on the tail, but across a primarily white scheme. So these are almost, you know, these are all pretty bland. Aside from the tail, it's mainly Euro white. I can understand people would still want to get them, especially if you're a Condor collector, but they're not exciting me too much. And jcwings has announced one of them already, albeit on an inferior mould. So I'm just struggling to get excited by these. I'm going to put them all into workhorse territory. I'm sure they'll look lovely, but they're just not very exciting. Okay, so now we've got 4 more Airbuses to go, and the next one up is an American Airlines A330-300, and you'd expect that this is a model that's been made loads of times before, but it's really interesting when you look back through American Airlines A330s. There have only been 5 previous A330s, and 3 of those 5 are A330-200. So there's actually only been 2 previous releases of an A330-300 in this livery, and one of those is by Aero Classics, which is nice because the AC A330 is really nice. That's made in 2014, but it's a little bit glittery because Aero Classics paint sometimes is. It doesn't have obviously got aerials or anything like that. The second one is made in 2015 by Gemini, but it's on the very old cradle mount mold, not the new JC mold. And even so, neither of those A330s are really like top of the bunch. Phoenix has never made an A330, and neither has Aviation 400 or Panda for American Airlines. So basically that means that this NG release here, which is N277 Alpha Yankee, is really the first modern or or the first very modern mould that's has got an American A330-300, and NG have already made the 200 not long ago, and that turned out really nicely. I don't see why this one wouldn't also turn out really nicely on what is an excellent mould, fully up to date with aerials and proper slotting wings and everything. So for me, this one, even though you're thinking, oh, American A330 has been done a lot, actually it hasn't been done well that much, and it hasn't been done that often. I'm going to put this one up in the high flyer. It's not a model that I would buy, but I can imagine this one's going to be a super hot seller. So the next model is one which may not be a super hot seller out west, but it's actually probably my favourite model of the release set so far, and that is a China Eastern A330 wherein B5969 is the reg, and it's got this China Telecom colour scheme. Now, everyone hates the China Eastern standard scheme, but they've got so many special schemes, which is really cool. And this one's quite nice. It adds this wavy red belly and some other logos to the Euro white version of the scheme. I really like the swallowtail logo of China Eastern anyway, and I'm a big Chinese collector fan, so I'm incredibly biased, obviously, in this case. I think this is going to be a really cool model. I'm looking forward to getting this one. This one's going up into supersonic. Okay, and bringing up the rear of the Airbuses is the first usage of the new NG models A350-1000. And yeah, it's interesting. I really like the mold. Obviously, I've given it a review. It's going to be really nice. I think the NG models A350s are great anyway, and the 1000 just carries on that legacy. But there's not a lot new to be done with the A350-1000 that hasn't been made already by Phoenix, Gemini, JC, or Aviation 400. The first one of these models is Virgin Atlantic. The reg is GVEVE, and I believe the aircraft is called Fearless Lady. Now, what is nice about this is even though there have been 4 previous Virgin Atlantic A350-1000s, none of them have been this aircraft. They've always been other regos. So if you're a fleet collector for Virgin, and I imagine there are a few people that are, then this would be a great addition. I'm sure it'll look nice anyway. It is a little bit a shame that so many other versions have existed beforehand, but let's be honest, I think this NG version will be as good as any of the others, probably better than most of them. The only other one that's really competing heavily with it is probably the recent Aviation 400 version. So this will be a nice version. And for that reason, I'm going to put this up in the high flyer, because they've at least chosen a reg that hasn't been done before, and it's on the new mould, which I think is really nice. Now, similarly, the next A350-1000 that they've chosen to do is also one that's been announced at least by everyone, and this is the house colours FWMIL, but wearing the new Qantas Sunrise logos. Now, I've talked about this multiple times across release videos recently, and it has been announced by everyone else, but it's only actually been released by one manufacturer, and that's Phoenix. So that's probably the weakest of all of the A350 molds that are likely to get this livery on it. So JC have announced it, Aviation 400 announced it, none of those models are out yet. There's a good chance this NG release will be out before those. So this is another good example why you shouldn't pre-order models, because you might have pre-ordered one of those previous ones, but now NG are likely to gazump them with something which will be as good and out sooner. There's not a huge amount to say about the scheme that I haven't said previously. It's fine, and it's certainly something I think that will excite a lot of Qantas collectors. I'm sure this is going to have a really nice finish, and it's going to be highly competitive. I'm going to put this into high flyer, though I guess you could argue it's China's workhorse since everyone else has already announced it. But I think this will be a really good version of it. And like I say, they're going to get it out sooner than JC, certainly, and probably sooner than AV400 too. So that finishes up the Airbuses for this month. So we're now going to move across and look at what's coming from Boeing. So looking at what they just did for Airbus, or what has just been announced for Airbus, you've got JetBlue, Condor, American, China Eastern, Virgin, Airbus. Fundamentally, you know, this is where this whole release set feels a bit familiar. These are not unusual airlines or surprising releases. There's not a lot here where you're looking at and going, oh, that's really unusual. I wasn't expecting that. So that's slightly disappointing from the release set, and that kind of feeling continues on with these Boeing models as well, because now we've got other airlines that NG are fond of or have released a lot, or at least have been released a lot by other manufacturers like Southwest, All Nippon, Qatar, United. So that's a little disappointing this month that isn't that, you know, unusual airline. Those are really cool, and I didn't expect that kind of releases. Instead, this is all looking a bit familiar. But we're going to start off with a couple of Southwest Airlines 737-700. Southwest has been getting a lot of exposure recently, both from NG, but also through exclusive models made by Panda, which have often been going through Waffles collectibles site, and Gemini themselves have been making some models as well. So Southwest has been getting a good reaction, and if I look at the database, there are 50 now 737-700s that have been made for Southwest Airlines. So you'd think there isn't that much new that could be done. However, the two models we've got here are both the same aircraft, N230WN, and they're wearing the Colorado 1 colours. And one of these has never been done before, which is nice. So the one that has been done is the standard scheme, which is wearing the canyon blue tail here, and that was made quite recently. I think it was in 2019 by Gemini on their really old mold. This is one of those times when they've released recently on both the Phoenix and, sorry, not the Phoenix, based on their original Gemini mold, but also on the newer jcwings mold. And this one was using the older one. Another one of those cases where something's been sitting in the factory for a long time, you feel. So anyway, they've released that version of it, which is the same as one of these releases. But the other release here is also Colorado 1, but it's got the new style livery tail. So that's new, has never been made before. I really like these special schemes, and obviously the 73G mold from NG is really nice. So these would go very nicely. I know they reduced the Missouri one quite recently, two versions of that, but in that case it was the winglets that were different. Yeah, I think these will be good. I think these will sell well as well. People love Southwest, so I don't really see any reason why these shouldn't get a decent rating here. But for me, I think that you've got to put the new one up into Supersonic, because I think that there's going to be a lot of people clamoring to get that, the Colorado one with the current livery tails. And because the other one's been made already, I think we'll put it up into High Flyer. Having said that, it's still going to be better, substantially better, than the Gemini version, which is using that really old mold. Which is not a mold, I don't hate that mold, but it's just a lot inferior to what is being offered by NG here. The next two 73Gs on the list are also a pair. In this case, it's All Nippon Airways. And I actually didn't realise that All Nippon had retired its 737-700s. Jesus, that makes you feel old. Apparently they operate the aircraft for about 16 years, so not a long, long time. But they were retired earlier this year, and one of these two aircraft, one which is registered JA06AN, has... it's got the retirement stickers on it. The other one is in the standard scheme. So they're both very, very similar. Looking back through releases for All Nippon 73Gs over the years, there have been 8 previous models. Quite a lot of them are wearing special schemes. 4 of those 8 have been made by Panda. And so it's actually relatively unusual to find releases that actually have this just ordinary, the standard All Nippon scheme. In fact, I'm not sure there are any that have this version of the scheme, the most up-to-date version, which has the titles which after the ANA, where it says Inspiration of Japan. So this is again a case where when I first looked at this, oh, that's not very interesting. But actually, when you actually look at what's been made, you realise they actually haven't made these before. They actually are quite unique. So, yeah, again, they don't fit my collection criteria, but it doesn't mean they're bad models by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm going to put one of these up into Supersonic. I'm going to put the other one into High Flyer. It's nice to get 2 versions, but I'd be surprised if many people buy both of them. But it's actually, I think... it surprised me that it's unique. I'd have thought that someone else would have made this model already, and they haven't. And somewhat surprisingly, there aren't any 737-800s this month, even though this release set is almost entirely made up of aircraft that are modern. There aren't many 738s, or there aren't any 738s. So we're going to jump straight into the wide body universe here. And next up, we're going to be taking a look at the 777s, of which there are 3 this month. The first of which is United Airlines N2352U, wearing the latest blue Evo scheme, which is a really nice livery and will make, I'm sure, a nice model, but is far from unique, because Aviation 400 recently produced a version of this, albeit a lot of those seem to come out with rather duff nose. And Gemini have also made a version of this too, albeit on their old mould with the giant wing seam. So you've got 2 previous versions. The AV400 one's near perfect if you've got one with a good nose. The Gemini one looks actually surprisingly decent, but does have the seam. So this one's not exactly unique. It's not particularly exciting. And I'm not entirely sure what to do with it. I think it'll sell well. I don't love, I have to say, the NG 777 is, in my opinion, their weakest existing mould. Doesn't make it bad, just makes it not as good, in my opinion, as the JC and AV400 versions. I'm going to put this one up into workhorse. I think it's going to be okay. I just don't think it's going to be great. It's been done before, but it's still going to be a decent model. And I kind of got a similar feeling about the next 2 models as well, which are both Qatar Airways 777-300 ERs as well. The only difference is the one wears the 25 years of excellence sticker, and that's A7B EE, and the other one is A7BED. NG have really had a great interest in Qatar recently. This will be their 4th and 5th Qatari 777s, and makes 25 Qatari 777 releases in 400 scale. But what is, again, interesting and somewhat surprising is that when you look back through all of these releases, they've almost all been special schemes, and you have to go back a long way to a Phoenix release that was made in 2018 to see the last one, which actually just wore a standard scheme. So that is interesting. That same year, actually, looks like, oh no, it was 2014, one before, which was made by jcwings on that very old seamed mould. So there have been a couple before, but not as many as you might think. But even so, I just struggle to get excited by these kind of relatively tedious modern wide bodies in not particularly exciting schemes. They might excite some people, they don't excite me. Yeah, it just has to be workhorse for these 2, because they're just not thrilling me. And as I said before, the NG 777 isn't the greatest 777 in the universe. So we've got 6 models left to discuss, and 5 of those are Boeing 787s. And we'll start with another Norwegian Air 787, another one from the UK branch. This one's registered GCKWD. It's got Ernest Shackleton on the tail. Both those things are pretty cool, and there haven't been a huge number of Norwegian 787s made. In fact, the only ones that have got British regis that have been made before were by JC, and they didn't have a figure on the tail. They said they have a UNICEF logo. So this actually is unique, and I think will look really nice. Ernest Shackleton's a really cool figure to have on the tail. So they made some really good choices for their UK subsidiary. I've said before that I think the NG 787 is really good. It's at least as good as anyone else's, arguably slightly better in my opinion. And I don't see any reason why this one wouldn't go straight up into supersonic. I think it's going to make a really nice model. And is unique, and it's nice. You know, not that many models this month that are unique, and you'll see that I tend to favour the unique models because, you know, there just aren't that many of them, and I want to see manufacturers doing more models that haven't been made by others already. I think it's better for the collector. It's good to have a choice, but at the same time it's also good to be able to get models that no one else has made too. So the next model on the list is Air Tahiti Nui, which is a really lovely scheme and a really lovely model, but it is one NG had made before, albeit on the slightly older version of the 787, which has had since then modifications to the undercarriage. So I've got the previous release, and it is really nice, but it is slightly hot roddy in the sense that the main gear is slightly too tall. They've fixed that now, And so this aircraft, FOTOA, Tetiaroa, will no doubt look excellent, but it's a re-release, and I don't give re-releases high scores typically unless there's a really good reason. So I'm going to put this one up into Workhorse. The next 777, another 9 as well, is Maya Mongolian Airlines JU1789. And I've already waxed lyrical in a previous video for JC, I think, about how much I really like this Mongolian scheme. I think it's beautiful livery with the horse's head on the fuselage, and that looks great. And even though JC have announced this, again, it's one of their long-term, in the future, who knows when it's going to turn up models, whereas this NG one is going to turn up at least within the next couple of months. So I think it makes sense for NG to announce it, and I think it will be a really nice release. And for those reasons, I'm going to put this one as supersonic. It's one I'm really tempted to get, even though I don't really have an excuse to get it, but I might get it anyway. It looks really nice. So this one I think is very worthy and up there in supersonic. The last two 787s are both Series 10 series aircraft. They're both Vietnam Airlines, VNA 873 and VNA 874. 873 has been made previously by Phoenix, actually, and that one carries this 100 years logo on it. Phoenix and Gemini have both also made the standard scheme, which is what 874 is wearing. So these are far from unique and have been made previously. The Gemini version came out in 2019's, and I presume that the Phoenix one probably came out the same year. Yep, it did. Probably at the time that they were delivered. So NG are getting in late on the game here with their 787-10 mould. It is a really nice scheme, the Vietnam scheme, but they have been made before. I thought most people already own one of those previous ones. I'm not sure that this one will be so much better that it's worth replacing, especially because the Gemini version was actually made on the excellent JC mould. So for me, yeah, it's just more Workhorse. You know, they're re-releasing things that have been done by others beforehand. Yeah, but interesting enough, that is a successful strategy. I'm just not convinced that it is. So they don't excite me, even though it's nice and the models look great, but they're just not exciting. And that's the end of the Airbuses and the Boeings, which leaves us with the non-Boeing area of the release set, which is always tiny nowadays for every single manufacturer apart from Aero Classics. And this month there is a single model in that set, and it is another Air China Cargo two-pillar TO204. This one's wearing B2872. And I initially thought, you know, that this was exactly the same as the previous reg release, B2871, but it isn't. The difference, however, is quite small. The difference is that on the previous release, the cargo title is in this kind of red italics or comic-y sans kind of look, and on this one, it's much more formulaic. It's much more like the Air China titles. But what is interesting here is that I don't think this aircraft was ever actually delivered, and I've seen photographs online of this plane, B2872, and it's just sitting at the Ulanovsk factory in 2017 there, and I'm not sure the aircraft ever actually was delivered to Air China Cargo. So that makes this a little bit unusual in that, yeah, it probably never saw active service, but it definitely still was wearing the scheme in 2017, and despite the fact it hasn't got engines in the photograph I'm looking at, it looks well maintained. So yeah, that makes it interesting. It actually, for me, makes it a little bit more interesting than it was, but it's still effectively really just very minor titles change. I'd have much rather that they were producing some Russian Tu-204s that flew for actual Russian airlines like Red Wings or Vladivostok Avia or Del Avia or Trans-European or anyone else basically that's a Russian passenger airline than this. So again, even though I might get this model, I'm not decided. I'm going to put this in the Workhorse because it is effectively a re-release, just a minor tweak. Okay, so that is it for this month's releases. We've got 23 models, Not a single one have I put in gas guzzler, but it's unusual for NG to get gas guzzler releases because almost all their molds are exemplary and the finishes are usually great. I know that NG have had a few issues seemingly with getting things glued recently. They've admitted them as much themselves. I haven't actually seen much of an issue here, and I think it's been overplayed a little, but that doesn't really play into the ratings in these videos anyway. On the whole, you've got another solid set of releases, but not particularly inspiring. If I've sounded kind of slightly bored through this video discussing these models, it's because I am really. It's a lot of the same stuff. It's not especially exciting from where I'm standing, but hey, I'm probably in the minority and a lot of people will be excited by models in this set. There are a few models here that fit my criteria. There are several which I'm slightly tempted by. But there's also a lot of re-releases, workhorse, and perhaps, you know, I could easily maybe have moved those A350-1000s down into workhorse territory as well. But I'm not going to. I'm going to keep them at the high flyer. But you could, if you see what I mean, in the sense like they are effectively re-releases of models others have made. And if you look through this release set and are looking at unique models that nobody else has announced or made, then of the 23 models we've got here, I think there are probably only 6 or 7 that have not been released or announced by somebody else. So that's a shame. Even of those 6 or 7, it's often just something very slight, which is different to the existing releases like the JetBlue. So there's not a lot of wow, blue sky thinking coming from NG this month, but I still think these will sell super well, I'm sure. And hey, that's my opinion. I would like to see other molds being used by NG from their sets. Where's the T154 gone? Why aren't they releasing Russian 204s, TriStars, Classic 75s, SPs? You know what I want, but NG are aiming for the mass market here and newer collectors, younger collectors, people collecting contemporary models. And we've got a lot of brand spanking new aircraft in this release set. Anyway, that's it from me for this month for NG Models. So thanks very much for listening to me prattle on. I hope you enjoy the models that they are producing. Leave me a comment as to what it is you think you'll be getting from this month's NGs. And I'll see you next month. Hopefully there'll be some more classics. We already know there's going to be some TriStars. So it'll be interesting to see what else there is. See you later.